I am starting. Welcome to those who are joining. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am going to go ahead and start recording. And so if you prefer not to be seen in the recording, feel free to stop your video, but I'm also happy to see people's faces. So feel free to stay here. Oops. And then while we're waiting to get started, if you can go ahead and type your name into the chat box so that we know who is here today, that will be super helpful for us. Thank you to those who've already done that. I'm just letting more folks in here. As folks are joining us, I just want to say welcome to our Backyard Habitat Directory training, and thank you for joining us. And if you could go ahead and type your name into the chat box, that would be great. Your name, and then also your business name, so that we can know who is here today. That would be great. And if you've already typed in your name and didn't add your business name, that is okay. We'll be getting started right at 2 o'clock. So we've just got a couple more minutes. We've got lots of folks coming in. And for those who have just joined, welcome to our Backyard Habitat Directory training. We'll be getting started here in just a couple minutes. If you can go ahead and type your name and business name into the chat box, that would be great. So we'll get started in just a couple minutes.
Hello.
Hello. Hello, Denicia.
How are you, Susie?
Good. How are you?
Am I the first one?
No, we've got lots of folks there. We've got about 25 folks here so far, and more are joining by the second.
Great.
So we've got a really good group today.
Fantastic. So yeah. I just type my name in here, right here.
Yep. If you take your mouse down, your cursor kind of down to the bottom, you should have a black bar pop up with some options. And one of the options is to chat.
Okay.
And if you open that up, you can type in your name and your business name, and that would be perfect. Yeah.
Okay. So I just type here. Okay, great.
Exactly.
And then do I mute myself? Is that what happens?
Yes, it would be great if folks can mute themselves. That way we don't have any feedback or other technical issues, which we're likely to have just the by the nature of things, right? So we'll try to minimize those. But
and if we need to leave early, that's okay.
Yeah, we're hoping folks can stick with us through the end if possible, but if you do need to leave early, we are recording this. And two notes with the recording. One, if you prefer not to have your, face show up on the recording, feel free to stop the video, which will just prevent
Okay.
your video from showing.
Okay.
And then let's see, we got a lot of people coming in. Give me 1 second here. And then also I'll be sharing out the recording sometime over the next couple of days. And so if you do need to miss a piece of it, you can go back and rewatch that part, or you can hold on to it. And if questions come up in the future, you can refer back to it as well.
Okay. And the Q&A is next week. Is that correct?
We're going to have a Q&A. We're going to have we're kind of have 3 total Q&As. One of them today after the backyard habitat overview portion, and then a second one after our guest speaker today. Okay. And then the one next Wednesday is primarily going to be focused on the different kind of administrative items that we need from everybody.
Okay.
And but we will we might have time for questions that come out of today's training that we're not able to get to.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I've been through 2 years worth of trainings, but I saw this one was required. And some people that work with me have joined up and are as designers who've been, because I've been farming a lot of my design work out to other designers. And so they're now getting involved. So yeah, it's all kind of good. It's like it's growing.
I heard from one person that you referred to us. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, I've got at least 3. So it's
That's
really
great.
fun.
That's awesome.
I've been more mentoring them than
right.
And they've been going out and doing the design. So anyways, okay. All right. Thank you. There's Tari.
Sure.
Okay. Perfect.
Yeah, we're going to go ahead and get started because we've got a pretty packed agenda here today. So we'll just jump right in here. Thank you everybody for joining us today. We really appreciate your time and that you are interested and enthusiastic about being in our directory. I am going to keep letting people in here, so I'm going to try to multitask, which isn't always my strong suit, but if folks can go ahead and mute themselves, that would be great, just so we don't have any technical problems. And I can also mute folks from my end, so I might do that if I notice that you're not muted. And if you haven't already, please go ahead and type your name and business name into the chat box so that we know who is here today with us. And with that started, we can jump right in. Everybody should be able to see my presentation that's up here. And yeah, so let's jump right in here. I'm going to, give me 1 second here. Okay, here we go. So I wanted to share our agenda for today. We're going to start with a program overview that Megan and Megan is the co-manager of Backyard Habitat along with me. We're going to share an overview of the program that will include our certification criteria and how to support participants in the program. Then we'll have a question and answer session followed by a break. We have a guest speaker named Ryan Gilpin that is joining us today and is going to present for about 30 minutes near the end. And then we'll have questions and answers after his presentation as well. All right, and because we do have quite a bit of information to share, we're going to save our questions and answers for those designated Q&A timeframes. So if you have questions that come up during the presentation, please write them down, and that way we can make sure to answer them during the Q&A portions. All right, so to start with, welcome to Backyard Habitat. Many of you have been in the directory for a few or multiple years, and that is really wonderful. We have some new folks joining us today as well. That is also wonderful. So welcome, whether you're returning or whether you're new, we're very glad to have you here, and we I'm super excited to be hosting a directory again this year. So Backyard Habitat, the motto of our program is plant roots, create a habitat, and transform the world 1 yard at a time. And oops, sorry, bear with me here. And like I mentioned, the program is co-managed. Sorry, I'm letting some people in here. The program is co-managed between Portland Audubon, which my co-manager Megan will be here representing, and then I'm with Columbia Land Trust. So together, Megan and I and our two organizations lead the Backyard Habitat Certification Program. So Columbia Land Trust, the organization I work with, is a land trust that's conserving about 50,000 acres along the Columbia River. And by conserving and restoring, some of those properties are properties that we've purchased. Some of them we have conservation easements on, but they all have what we consider to be like really critical habitat, either habitat that's imperiled. There may be a plant on the property that isn't found anywhere else or is imperiled, or they are properties that are critical for the migration of wildlife. And so this runs the course of the Columbia River, starting in Astoria, starting at the coast, and working its way down past the Dalles. So we work in that kind of like band that runs along the Columbia River. The Backyard Habitat program is considered to be a really critical part of our conservation work, because through the program, we are creating wildlife corridors so that, as the land trust is working on these like larger properties, Backyard Habitat is working in the urban areas and building really important habitat throughout an urban area that used to not be urban, used to be very wild. And so our program participants are essentially restoration volunteers that are dedicating their time, dedicating their money, dedicating their resources to rebuilding this habitat. And so that's a little bit about Columbia Land Trust. I'll pass it over to Megan to share about her organization.
Hi, everyone. For those of you that I don't know, I am Megan, the co-manager of Backyard Habitat based at Portland Audubon. And I want to give advanced apologies. I have my large dog napping next to me, and if he barks, I can't control it. He's very communicative of all the delivery folks. But to speak about Portland Audubon, so Audubon's mission is to inspire all people to love and protect birds, wildlife, and the natural environment upon which life depends. And Portland Audubon has been doing this since 1902. So we've been around for quite some time. And we do a lot. I even find sometimes that I forget to talk about various programs that Audubon has, but often folks are most familiar with the wildlife sanctuary in the Northwest Hills on Cornell Road. It's 172 acres with various trails. It's where our wildlife care center is currently located, although that will actually be changing in the coming years. But the wildlife care center rehabilitates animals. It is open 365 days a year. It's also on Cornell Road where our nature store is located, where you can buy all sorts of nature related items. But that's kind of often the public face of Audubon, but a lot of other things that we do. We have extensive adult and youth education, camps, programs, eco tours, on and on. We do have various community science programs. The one pictured here is actually part of the Christmas bird count. It's an annual kind of outing in early January where folks do this kind of community science project year after year to count birds. Of course, there's environmental programs that are part of this work, such as Backyard Habitat, but also like Audubon's Lights Out efforts. And all of this, of course, connects to Audubon's greater conservation work that's happening not just in our region specifically, but also we do work in Eastern Oregon along the coast and also statewide. So there's a lot of things going, but Backyard Habitat really is just one of the important ways that we kind of take that conservation work to the community, right? It's about doing the on the ground restoration, but doing it in partnership with community members. And I really see that as the heart and soul of the program.
Thank you, Megan. Okay, so that's a little bit about us. Next, we'll turn this lens around and talk about you all. This is, we've had a partnership with local arborists, landscape designers, and other landscape professionals for quite a few years now. And it's a really, really wonderful partnership. This is a really critical resource for our program participants. And so we're very thankful to you all for being part of this. Some of our participants have some limited resources. They might have physical disabilities or find it difficult to do some of this on their own. They might not have the skills or the time to do it. And so being able to call on you all to help with their projects really helps them live into the vision they have for creating habitat in their yards. And the directory is made up of quite a few different types of professionals. We've got arborists, we've got landscape designers, folks who do plant installation, maintenance, weed removal, all sorts of things. The common point that you all have is that we do ask everyone to attend this training because there's kind of a it's a mutually beneficial relationship where you all, when you're working with our participants, are really careful to make sure you are helping them in ways that will help them get certified. That's usually the goal of folks who are in the program, is to reach one of the certification levels. But we try to do all that we can to support you all as well. We promote your business on our website. We mention this directory during every site visit, and we promote it on our Facebook page and our blog and in different ways. So we're always looking for ways to promote your all's work. So I think it's a really, really great partnership. All right, so now I pass it over to Megan. She's going to give the first part of our program overview here.
All right, thanks, Susie. So I imagine you're all pretty familiar, but if not, our mission, kind of related to our motto, right, is to work with urban and suburban residents, whether they be homeowners or renters, but also maybe at a community site, right, a school, place of worship, community garden, et cetera, to provide them with the information, tools, resources, and also recognition, right, for gardening sustainably and gardening to create wildlife habitat. So that's what we're doing and what you all help us do. Next slide. Yeah, and so a brief history for folks that aren't familiar. It really did start as a partnership. It was actually Portland Audubon and originally Three Rivers Land Conservancy, which joined with Columbia Land Trust, that kind of joined together to start the program. And kind of the impetus for the program was a group of residents in Southwest Portland that were working to do noxious weed removal in a park, and really kind of came to the realization that in order to be successful, they need to engage the adjacent property owners, right, if they're really actually going to eradicate those weeds. And so that's what they did. And they started a pilot, and now we're here. That's the summary. But no, it really just grew from there. The program, through a lot of different agency support and community partnerships, launched Portland-wide in 2009. And we've kind of steadily grown it since then. And we completed a multi-year expansion in 2020. So now we work with residents in urban and suburban Clark, Clackamas, Multnomah, and Washington counties. And, this is a question that we often get, or sometimes folks actually get wrong. So we always think it's helpful to just share who can participate. Lots of folks know about residents that enroll their private yards that are under 1 acre. And that is a big part of the program. But we also do work with community sites. So we work with multifamily housing and apartment complexes, various places of worship, businesses, nonprofits, et cetera. And even just like in that right lower corner there, that's an example where Metro actually enrolled their kind of headquarters on Grand in Portland in the program. So lots of different folks enroll, and we would love more community sites. And we of course do this in partnership. It's a really big part of the program. Kudos to Nestor, who I know is here today, who's a really big part of this work. We're really able to do some of these community partner works in particular in partnership with other amazing organizations and individuals. So kind of along the top, we have some great partnerships with the local nonprofit Verde and Hacienda CDC, where we're doing some really cool projects. One of them here, Nestor, to give him an extra shout out, is we're doing urban habitat installations where we partner with low-income residents to install rain garden and naturescapes with a number of different organizations and youth. We also have a program that we work with Hacienda to provide a naturescaping curriculum that we co-developed with Verde to youth. This is Hacienda staff, and they then get to go through this curriculum and then help install a naturescape, and then they all got a plant to take home with them. We also partner with another program at Audubon, that's a Green Leaders program. It works with Hacienda Youth to kind of provide them with training, and then they lead summer camps for Audubon, and then we're looking for additional ways that they can partner to support our programs, which is pretty exciting. And then some other just amazing partnerships. We work with Apano, this image on the lower left, to do kind of very community-led efforts to kind of hear from the community what they want. And some of that was to do these plantings at different schools in the Jade district along 82nd. So that's that in action. We also have a great partnership with Central Cultural in Cornelius in Washington County, where we are naturescaping their campus through a really community-led process. And then we're going to be co-developing short Spanish language videos kind of centered around the tenets of the program. And so all of those partnerships have been amazing in helping drive our program to be more inclusive and more accessible. But a really big part of our project, of course, is also just our volunteers. And this is an image. We've had some volunteers really step up to support fellow volunteers around elements like plant ID. And so we've been doing a bunch of plant ID walks for our volunteers so that folks that are interested in supporting the program can really feel successful. So all of that kind of helps make us able to do what we do and do it better. And so how does this program work? I imagine you all are relatively familiar, but refreshers can be helpful. So when someone expresses interest in the program, or maybe you meet someone that you think would be interested, we always encourage them to first just enroll in the program. And for just about a year now, we started to offer it on a sliding scale. So we didn't want cost even to be a barrier to engagement with the program. So it starts at $5. And once someone enrolls, they are assigned to a habitat technician that kind of focuses on the specific area where they live. They'll schedule a time to come out, tour the property with them, talk about what their priorities are and kind of how that aligns with their habitat goals and the program's framework. They get our wonderful little sign that's up here in the upper right. They get a resource packet with a lot of resources, including our native plant discount flyer, which we'll talk about a little bit more later. And then after the visit, they get a site-specific report. I imagine quite a few have seen these in the past that kind of gives details for how they can reach their goals. And then they get to work. And this is oftentimes when they might contact you and say that they need help, right? So this is kind of a great point where they're working and maybe identify they need an arborist or they need someone to support with design or weed removal. That's a big one. And then as folks work, our technicians do call them to check in. Also, after folks have been with the program for a year, we do offer a follow-up consultation virtually. And then at some point, often maybe after a consultation or a call, or I've sent an email, someone might email and say, hey, I'm ready for certification. So at that point, we connect them with a volunteer who comes back out, kind of does another tour, talks to them. And then if they've kind of implemented kind of the kind of guidepost for reaching one of the levels of certification. They get the wonderful sign in the lower right-hand corner. They get additional benefits that we mail them, like gift cards to like the Backyard Bird Shop. And that certification is valid for 3 years, at which time we ask them to renew. If they're kind of maintaining their kind of habitat, they're able to just renew online by filling out a form. But sometimes people say, hey, I've done a lot more, or I hired someone and they really helped me. I want to maybe upgrade to a higher certification level. So at that point, we'll come back and do another certification visit. So that's kind of a quick and dirty snapshot of how it all works. And some highlights of that, right, where we are through all of these partnerships and all the folks that have enrolled. We now have 8,500 sites that are enrolled across the 4-county area. That equals about 1,900 acres. About 3,000 of those properties have reached certification. We do have about 325 community sites currently, and over 1,500 volunteer hours dedicated to the program, and over 150,000 native trees, shrubs, and ground covers have been planted as a result, which is pretty exciting. And this here, we update this about once a year, so we'll be updating it in January 2022. So this is even slightly out of date. I can say in our last fiscal year, we did 1,500 new site visits. So this will fill in even more. But this is just a snapshot of all the properties that are enrolled in the program. And one thing I always point out when I look at this slide is each of those dots is at least one, if not many, people, right? So it's not just the on the ground restoration, but it's really supporting the people, right? There are stewards and there are spreaders within the community. So it's really cool, and you can see where we've been longer and where we're hoping to fill in that map even more. So it's pretty exciting. And I'll pass it back to Susie to dive into the specifics.
All right, thanks, Megan. All right, so some of you are going to be familiar with this, but I'm going to go ahead and run through this here. With Backyard Habitat, we have a framework that currently revolves around certification. The idea is that we start folks out kind of with a stepping ladder or a stepping stone. They can do a little bit and reach silver certification, and then that inspires them, that encourages them. They can see that they can be successful with this, and so they keep going and they do more and more, and eventually might get to gold certification. And then if they're really ambitious, they can do even more and get up to platinum level certification. I do want to point out, we have a lot of folks in the program who are really engaged and really interested and passionate, and they're not interested in the certification framework, and that's totally fine. We still embrace them as part of the program and send them all of the same benefits. So just wanted to mention that. Within our framework, we have 5 core elements that we talk about. The first one is removing priority weeds, planting locally native plants, reducing the use of pesticides, supporting wildlife, and managing rainwater or stormwater on site. Since we'll be talking about weeds, I just wanted to take a second to mention that within our team and within the local conservation movement, we're having conversations about the best terminology to use. Should we be using the term invasive weed? Should we be calling it a beneficial plant that can outrun native plants? I think no matter what term we end up settling on, the concept behind priority weeds is that they've landed here. They don't have anything that eats them or predates on them, and so they can kind of grow out of. They can grow really fast and push out native plants that our local insects really rely on. So Megan, there's a slide where Megan will be covering that in more detail, but just want to kind of touch on that. So in terms of priority weeds, this is the term I'm going to go ahead and use today because I feel like it's most common and people understand it. But there are 3 there are 3 different lists. There's one list for each of the different certification levels. So for example, in order to reach silver certification, someone would need to remove any of the Himalayan blackberry or the ivy or the traveler's joy that's on their property. I think there are about 7 others in this list as well. So these are just examples. And then we have different plants on the gold list that includes Italian arum, lesser celandine, herb robert, and some others. And then we've got the platinum list where folks would need to remove reed canary grass and tree of heaven, so forth. So, again, the point here is just that some of these plants are pushing out the native plants that our wildlife rely on. And that's why this is considered like a really critical component of the program, which isn't to say that there aren't some benefits that come from having these plants in our area. So good conversation to be had there that we'll have a different day. But for now, just know that we didn't come up with this list on our own. When we formed the program, we had really in-depth conversations with local experts who are working on this every day. So folks at the city, at the Bureau of Environmental Services in Portland, and some of the other nearby cities, as well as staff from the soil water conservation districts and others. So we had conversations around what plants can we realistically expect participants to remove themselves, and which ones are really kind of causing the most havoc, particularly in riparian areas along waterways. So that's how we decided on the plants in our lists. And maybe another thing to note is that the plants in our priority weed list are different than any other lists you'll see. So there's not an overlap. It's very specific to our region here. If you want to see, and I recommend definitely going and visiting this page, if you want to see a complete list, as well as handouts for each of the plants listed, you can find those on our website at backyardhabitats.org. Just go down here to the resources link, and that will give you a few different options, and then click on the noxious weed icon, and that will take you to this page. So each of the plants listed here has a hyperlink that will take you to a handout that will give tips on on the best way to remove the plant. All right, so naturescaping with native plants. What do we mean by naturescaping? We'll be going over this in a few different slides, but for now, I'll provide a summary for naturescaping, which is that what we mean in our program when we talk about naturescaping is that within someone's yard, they kind of pick out an area of their yard to dedicate to native plants. And so for certification purposes, we're looking for a 50% or more, so half or more of those plants to be plants that are from the Portland plant list specifically. The Portland plant list is a really great resource because it's for plants very close to our area here. And within that area where they're planting the native plants, we're also looking for multiple canopy layers. So ground covers, shrubs, trees. And to my point earlier of we try to make that first step relatively easy. To reach silver certification, someone only needs to find an area that they dedicate to native plants that takes up 5% of their entire yard space. So their front yard and backyard combined, just 5% of that to get silver certification. And then that increases to 15% to reach gold certification, and then on up to 50% to reach platinum. And so the canopy layers increases each way, at each point, at each certification point as well. The third component of the program is pesticides reduction, or even better, pesticides elimination. So we're encouraging folks to decrease or eliminate their use of pesticides. That includes herbicides. And our primary resource for this is a locally created program called Grow Smart, Grow Safe. I've included their website here, growsmartgrowsafe.org. And on this website, there's great information about pesticides and herbicides that are on the market, how toxic they are, and what can be used that is less toxic. And so if you have a specific product, you can look up that product name, or you can look up the primary ingredient. And you can search that on this website, and it will show you the toxicity level. And you can also look to find something that's coded green, meaning it's not toxic. And so I definitely recommend checking this out. The color coding used with Grow Smart, Grow Safe is different than the color coding used with the EPA. I know they have their own similar list, but this one is very regionally specific. Wildlife stewardship is the fourth element of the program. And for this one, we provide a menu of options. So you can see here that we have multiple bullets. We have about 8 bullets here. And so participants get to choose which of these they are interested in having in their yard. They only need to do 1 for silver, 2 for gold, and 3 for platinum. What we find is that people get really excited about this one, and they do as many as they can often. So this one's a pretty fun one. Then we have stormwater management. And similarly, we have a menu of options where they need to do 1 to reach silver, 2 to reach gold, and 3 to reach platinum. So some of these, such as large canopy tree, they may already have on their property, and or they can plant one, and that will qualify as well. So they can also disconnect downspouts, put in a rain garden, remove grass, restore soil by leaving the leaves, and practice water conservation efforts, and eco-friendly maintenance practices, which primarily is trying to shift people away from gas-powered garden tools to electric power tools or some other kind of less toxic maintenance practices. All right, so we have a whole criteria sheet that we include in the resource packet that each participant gets at their site visit. I'm not going to go over this in great detail. I mostly wanted to steer you to the page on our website where you can view this. So that's listed down here at the bottom. You can also probably do a Google search for backyard habitat certification criteria. Oops, sorry, hold on here. Let me click somewhere. Okay, here we go. All right, and so now I'll share this back over with Megan to talk about how to support our program participants.
Awesome, Susie, can you go to the next slide? So I think in putting this together, we just wanted to really talk about what are some of the ways that really we know you all can best help support program participants when you're working with them to help make them successful. And also be aware of from our end, some of the questions that often come up that participants raise to us. So to kind of pass that along so you all can help us in this effort. So one really big thing that you can do is, of course, encourage folks to plant native plants and to plant native plants from multiple canopy layers. And I know questions are going to come up about this, so I will talk a little bit about it, and we might have more time later. But, of course, always the question is native to where. And so as a program, we do focus on plants that are native to our specific ecoregion, right? This, kind of lower Willamette Valley, and within the image on the right, which you all may be familiar with. It's often used within, included in Metro's native plant brochure, right? That's going to be the area in yellow. So that's kind of our ecoregion versus that Coast Range and or the Cascade Range, and those different ecoregions. And so, I think folks are familiar that ecoregions really are just large areas that kind of have distinct environmental conditions. And so the plants that are native to our ecoregion, have evolved and adapted to this region over thousands and thousands of years. And these are species that were here before European colonization. And so for the purposes of the program, we focus on plants native to this ecoregion, and we use, if you'll go to the next slide, Susie, the Portland plant list to kind of determine what plants are locally native. And so that's what we're going to look for when certifying a site. And within that, this is also something that is often a question. Subspecies, varieties, and cultivars of plants are considered non-native for the purposes of the program. And this is something we address. It's more that there's been more research in this area, which is really exciting. But it hasn't been conclusive enough to date to consider whether, when you are altering plants, for instance, whether they're still going to have the same environmental value of the kind of non-altered plants in essence. And a common question that comes up that I imagine you all get and or you all have for us is whether the Portland plant list will be updated for climate change. And this is definitely something that we have asked about ourselves, because it's something that we're curious about. And honestly, as far as we know, there's no date that has yet been set for changing it. And honestly, there isn't a consensus of what would be added or deleted or how it would change, right? In essence, there's a lot of questions and not yet a lot of answers. So it is something that we're paying attention to. But one way that we think about it or approach it, right, is that, for the purposes of the program, even for silver certification, really, we're only looking for those areas, those concentrated areas with 5% of the plants to be Portland plant list plants. And even within that, right, we're only looking for in those areas, 50% of the plants in those areas to be Portland plant list plants, which is just another way of saying there's still a lot of space to plant other plants, right? If someone's really wanting to do xeriscaping, which we understand, right, there's a lot of space to do that as well. But if you all have more questions about that later, we can chat about that. Next slide. And so why native plants, right? And this is kind of the why, which kind of answers that previous slide, is it still is about the insects and the birds and the wildlife, and that really still is the priority. And healthy insect populations are required for healthy bird and amphibian populations. And native insects have adapted to live out their entire life cycle in relationship to native plants. And so we definitely understand that many plants from around the world can provide pollen or nectar to our insects, but 90% of native insects can only live out their entire life cycle on native plants, right? And of course, the birds are kind of reliant on that, right? Particularly baby birds as well. So that's kind of why there is a focus on native plants for the program, but also a lot of area programs also focus on it, as well as programs throughout the US. Susie, next slide. And so this is just an example. It's from the Portland plant list. If you're ever talking to someone or you're self-referencing, it's going to talk about trees, shrubs, and herbaceous native plants, and kind of how many birds and mammals they support. This isn't even showing the support for insect populations, just birds and mammals. So it can really show you and can be helpful when choosing particular plants as well. And there's just a section dedicated to this within the Portland plant list. And one thing I will say actually really quick is if folks aren't aware, you can access the Portland plant list for free online. You literally can just Google Portland plant list and you can find it. You can even search. I think it's like Control F or Command F, and you can actually look to see if a plant is in there and listed. You can also buy it for about $15. The Nature Store at Audubon does sell it. And then another component just to speak to and kind of when working with participants about the why that we focus on 5 canopy layers is because different canopy layers support different creatures, right? And so the more canopy layers you have, right, the more creatures you're supporting, but also there's a lot of creatures that need multiple canopy layers to, you know, meet all of their needs, right? So we do encourage having that kind of multiplicity of canopy layers, also because it creates more dynamic plant communities. So for silver, we're looking for the 3. For gold, we're looking for the presence of those 4 native canopy layers, and for platinum, the presence of 5 native canopy layers. And of course, we're just always going to be excited about big trees. So that's also just part of the story there. So one thing we just wanted to take a moment to talk about are like, what are common causes of confusion for program participants, right? The reasons that they reach out to us and they're confused, or the reason that maybe someone went out to visit their property and they weren't able to certify the property. And we just thought it'd be helpful for you all to be able to help us in these efforts. So one of them, Susie briefly talked about this earlier, but like one is the concentration of native plants within various areas, right? It can be one area, it can be multiple areas, but what we're looking for is kind of those concentrated areas of plants, kind of rather than the scattershot approach. And part of this is, creating those more dynamic habitats. Another thing is like from an insect perspective, and I often talk about approaching things from a bird's eye view, but from an insect perspective, when you do a density of planting of the same species, you're creating foraging opportunities closer together, right? That's also just more energy efficient, which for creatures that have to expend a lot of energy to meet their needs, that's incredibly beneficial. So we do look for concentrated areas. So that's a big thing. Also kind of just that we were talking about, we're looking for plants from the Portland plant list within those areas, right? That certainly doesn't mean you can't plant the wax myrtle. I have, several in my own backyard. I think they're great, but really just helping folks focus their naturescaped areas where 50% of the plants in those areas are Portland plant list plants. And then again, we do look for non-cultivars and non-hybrids. And again, that doesn't mean I also have cultivated native plants in my yard, but so it doesn't mean that if someone really wants one that we're gonna say don't do that, but for the sake of the program, we are looking for non-cultivars, right? Portland plant list plants in those concentrated naturescape areas. And speaking of native plants and where you can get them, we now provide all program participants every year with a native plant discount flyer. New participants get this at the time of their site visit, but everybody else gets it sent in the mail once a year. I imagine some of you have gotten this in the mail. And Susie is lead on this and does a really great job to continue to increase the nurseries participating. We're continuing to really look for more in Clark County. We have 1 this year, which is really great, Goodyear Farms, but we want more. So just letting participants know about this is great. It's a great resource for maybe you all have come in and you've helped them, but they're needing to add some more plants and helping them get it more affordably within their community. But we also want to continue to support other folks, right? So like, for instance, we really love to share native plant sales. So if you're involved with one, one in your area, please let us know. We really do want to get the word out. We want more access rather than less to native plants. And we're really happy to spread the word about that, or really other resources. We see ourselves as a resource hub. All right.
Thanks, Megan. All right, this might be a good point. I think everyone who is going to join us today has logged in at this point. So for anybody who didn't hear me mention this earlier, if you can go ahead and type in your name and the name of the business so that we can capture who all was here today, that would be great. All right, so we're still talking about how to support program participants. So that was step one that Megan covered. Step two is encouraging the creation of habitat and keeping cats inside. And so in terms of creating habitat, there are a lot of different ways to do this. And, you know, I'm just mentioning a couple today because we're short on time. But one of the ones that people seem to be drawn to the most is adding a nest box to their property. So it might be a bird nest box, it might be a bee box or a bat box. So I'll talk about a couple of these. Nest boxes they're great additions. We do encourage folks to put up nest boxes. There is some information that there are some specifics about how to select a nest box, where to place it, that will determine whether or not someone's successful actually bringing birds into their yard to nest. A great resource for this is nestwatch.org. They have specific information about what birds use different nest boxes with different cavity holes and so forth. So definitely check that out if this is something that interests you. A universal recommendation is to use a nest box that does not have a perch. In other words, like a little stick. Sometimes you'll see them where they have a little stick poking out of the front of the nest box for the bird to stand on. But what really happens is that it's a place for predators to stand on. So they can stand on that little perch and get into the hole and potentially eat the eggs or the hatchlings. So no perch. And cleaning the nest box annually is something that we always recommend to help keep pesky little fleas or whatever gets in there out. And then also just being aware of cats, whether the participant has a cat or whether there are roaming cats in the neighborhood. You know, making sure to have the conversation of like, okay, are there cats that come around? If so, let's make sure to place the nest box in a spot where the cat cannot access it. So that's a little bit about nest boxes. Then we have bees. We used to host mason bee classes. We haven't been able to do that since the pandemic started because it was something that we would do in a group setting. But, you know, we're very, very passionate about pollinators and bees and other insects. And so anything we can do to create habitat is great. I think in terms of program participants, probably what the largest majority of folks are drawn to are our native mason bees. And they're really fun creatures. They are social. You can get right up next to them and they are totally comfortable with that. They don't sting, so you don't have to worry about that. And they pollinate a large percentage of plants. And so they're really wonderful little creatures to have around. Here are some of their cocoons in this leftmost photo. And then this is a bee house that someone put out for them. These are called, I'm blanking on the name right now, but these are little tubes that they nest in. And then they also nest in twigs and pithy stems. So stems where the inside is pithy, which means it's kind of, it's easy to chew through. It's not like solid. It's got kind of like a corky inside. And then we do have a lot of ground nesting bees as well, particularly quite a few bumblebee species that nest in the ground. So having some bare ground like this picture is really helpful for our bee population. So a good pointer here is, you know, be cautious not to just put mulch over everything. Make sure to leave some bare spots for those ground nesters to nest in. Here's an image of a bee inside one of those pithy stems I was trying to describe. And then over here is a mason bee box. A really great resource for a large number of pollinators and bees is this website up here, crownbees.org. There's a lot of research and new emerging information about the best way to meet the needs of our local bee populations. And they are kind of on the forefront of sharing that information. So I recommend that. Another great way to create habitat is to leave woody debris on site. In particular, we are very lacking in our urban areas in standing dead trees, which we call snags. This is an example in this leftmost photo. This is actually a photo of Megan's house. This is her snag in her front yard. And she has a lot of birds that are drawn to it. They love sitting on these perches. This is primary habitat for woodpeckers and other species of birds that come through and are looking for a cavity to nest in. And so, we do encourage folks to think about trees that are dying or have died, that instead of totally removing them, like cutting them back to the ground, we recommend that they reach out to an arborist, ideally someone from our directory, and get an opinion on whether it could make a good snag, so that we can create some of this really great habitat for woodpeckers and other birds. Similarly, we've got trees that have died that are now laying horizontal on the ground, which we call nurse logs. They perform a lot of really important functions. You can see here that there are some native plants growing out of the top of this one. But as they break down and decompose on the ground, they create really ideal situations for both beneficial insects who nest in there, as well as for birds who will come by and feed on those insects. And so this is really great habitat right here. It also eventually contributes to soil health after it breaks down, kind of in the end stages. And you can also, if you don't have a tree that's coming down or has come down, you can also just accumulate piles of twigs and stems and create a brush pile with them. We have several species of birds, wrens in particular, that love to live in a brush pile like that. And like we've talked about before, the insects can also nest in those dead branches. So lots of good can come out of trees or wood that used to be deemed to be worthless, is actually extremely beneficial. Planting for pollinators. I think it's hard to find someone who doesn't get excited about the idea of having butterflies drawn to their yard. We are really struggling with our butterfly populations in particular, but actually quite a few different pollinators we're struggling with. So what we can do to support them and encourage them is to plant native plants that bloom throughout different seasons. And let me explain that a little bit better. So planting things that bloom in the spring, and then having an area where you plant things that bloom in the summer, and then having a different area where you plant things that bloom in the fall. And you can intermingle them, but by having things that bloom throughout different seasons, you're really feeding pollinators that come out at different times of year, because it's not like March 1st comes around, they all pop up and they're awake and they want food. They all come out at different times, and some of them are here year round. So the more we can do to provide food, the better. I already mentioned bare ground and how that's really good for bumblebees and other pollinators that nest in the ground. Rocks, little rock piles are also very beneficial, particularly for butterflies who like to sun on them. I've mentioned pithy stems already. If you're working with a participant who is particularly interested in creating a pollinator garden or meadowscaping, we highly recommend this handbook. It's called the Meadowscaping Handbook, and you can do a Google search for this. It's online. It was created by West Multnomah Soil Water Conservation District in partnership with Backyard Habitat and several other partners. And it's a very thorough handbook that shows how to prepare an area to be meadowscaping and what plants to choose, how to plant them, and then how to maintain them over time as well. So it's a really great resource. We also talk about window strikes and outdoor lighting in the program. This is really important because these are two primary things that harm birds in particular. By window strikes, we just mean birds that are running into windows. So this photo is an excellent illustration of that. You can see the outline of the poor bird that ran into this window. There are some really easy things that participants can do to try to prevent this. They can put up decals on their window. You can find these online, or Audubon sells some at their nature store. This is an image of these vertical silver strips that were applied to the window. This basically tells the birds like, oh, there are things here we don't want to fly through or we'll run into those. And so these are pretty easy measures to take. In terms of outdoor lighting, I think it's not so well known that the brightening of our night skies is incredibly detrimental to bird populations, in particular migrating birds. Migrating birds really rely on those dark skies in order to navigate through their migration route. And so when they come to an area like Portland or our metro region, not just Portland, but throughout our metro region, the sky isn't as dark here, and it's harder for them to continue along their migratory path because they can't use their navigation systems in such bright skies. And so we really recommend that folks put caps over their outdoor lighting so that light goes down, but it doesn't go up. And we also have some specific recommendations in the agreement that you all will be signing to be on the directory that talks about the different ratings of lighting and how to use lights that are rated to put out kind of a minimal amount of light to help decrease that. And so these are things that we do talk about in our site visit when we're out with a participant, but it's kind of an overwhelming amount of information sometimes at the site visits. So if you all have the will and capacity to add this conversation when you're working with them, that can help kind of reiterate those points as well. All right, so cats is one of the trickiest topics I think we talk about because a lot of people have them, and some of them are, some folks are really reticent to keep their cats indoors all the time for various reasons. And so we're not judgmental, we do just want to share information about why we recommend folks bring their cats inside. And the reasons for that, I think, are pretty obvious. They are one of the leading reasons that young birds die. And so, of course, that really impacts our bird populations. What we do is really steer people towards a local program called Cats Safe at Home. We include a brochure in the resource packet that's all about this campaign. And it answers some common myths. It provides some resources on how to build a catio, which is basically an outdoor cat patio, and tips for keeping cats indoors. So it has lots of really great information. And so this is another conversation you can have with folks. I definitely recommend, if you do have a conversation about cats, just keeping it light and informative and not too judgmental or harsh, because people can have pretty strong reactions to this. So, all right, so that is that. And time to hand it back over to Megan for step 3.
Thanks, Susie. So kind of the final step, and we're coming into the closing, I promise, is really encouraging participants, right, to just practice environmentally friendly and bird safe yard maintenance. So Susie, can you go to the next slide? And I'm going to touch on this really briefly because Ryan's going to kind of get into some more logistics here. But some things that you can continue to help encourage program participants or folks in general to do really is, of course, to ease up on the cleanup. I think this is a great time of year to think about it, right? Like the number of people out there just raking away all the leaves, instead to really encourage them to leave the leaves for a multitude of reasons, right? We all know that it helps improve the soil, but it's also really great for those insects, right? And the various birds like the very thrush that are going to be getting in there, turning over those leaves and getting their needs met, right? So just easing up in the cleanup, leaving the leaves, but also being considerate around maintenance and how it intersects with nesting seasons, right? And actually the next slide, I'll talk about that more, so I'll wait on that. But other elements just on it is like, if possible, using eco-friendly maintenance practice, right? Can people eliminate irrigating their lawn? And we're not saying don't water your plants, right? But do you need to irrigate the grass, right? Like, can people kind of take a step away from that and then being really thoughtful about when they are watering for water conservation? And in terms of just bird nesting times, there is some really great resources out there. Backyard Bird Shop has one. The Bureau of Environmental Services does as well. So this can be a helpful thing to direct people to, but just encouraging folks when they're doing it, but to the extent that it's possible, of course, for you all to just be aware of nesting times when doing removal of noxious weeds, clearing brush, conducting yard maintenance, and of course, working in tree canopies. And so this kind of brief chart here is really going to show you in green, right, that best time for disturbance, which is going to really be August to the end of January. And then, of course, like kind of more of an awareness, right, and kind of that early breeding season, of course, like kind of late winter into kind of early spring, and then the primary breeding season, right from mid-spring through the end of July, right? So avoiding disturbance within that time if it's possible, and if it's unavoidable, right, really surveying before you're doing work so that you're not doing negative impacts actually to the very wildlife we're trying to protect. Back to you, Susie.
All right. Trying to change it up so that we make sure y'all stay awake. I know how monotonous it can be with a single speaker. All right, so we are honing in on the Q&A session here. Just a couple more slides to go. So this has been the overview of the program, and I wanted to include this slide just on next steps, because I know probably you all are curious. For those of you who have been on the directory in the past, you're going to be familiar with this, but you are going to be getting updated forms. So what I'll be doing in the next couple of days is sending you all a follow-up email that includes a link to the recording of this training session, as well as these different forms or links to these forms. We're actually taking the forms online to make it a little bit easier. And so there's going to be a form where you submit your business information so that we know what information about your business to list on the directory. And then there's going to be what we call our practitioner agreement. And this is just agreement between your business and our program. Again, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but like, we're promoting your business and you're agreeing to help participants reach certification using our framework. And then we do ask for a contribution if you're able to, and I'll provide kind of a outline of what we suggest or recommend. It's sliding scale based on the size of your business. And then there's also a revenue tracking form. We send this out at the end of each calendar year. And it's where we just ask for you to let us know how many projects you've worked on over the course of the year with Backyard Habitat participants. Could be folks who are already in the program when you start working with them, or it could be folks who aren't yet in the program. And then when you start working with them, you encourage them and they sign up. Either way is great. And that tracking form just asks for the number of projects and the value, so the income you earned on those projects over the year. So that helps us really gauge how many folks are using the directory, as well as what kind of impact we're having within the local green economy. For anyone who is unsure of how to fill out these forms, we will be hosting a session next Wednesday from 2 to 3 p.m. to answer questions, to go over the forms. We may also have time to answer any questions that we're not able to get to today. And then we'll just need everything in by Friday, December the 31st. So once we get all of those things in, we're just going to go ahead on January 1st and take your business live in the directory. And if you don't get everything in by then, it's okay. Just send it to us when you can. And we'll, once we have that last item from you, we will then take your business live on the directory. If you don't submit the paperwork, then you won't show up in next year's directory. So if you're not interested, don't submit the paperwork, but hopefully everybody here is good with that. Let's see here. Okay, and then before we start the questions, I just wanted to share that I know for those of you who are returning, you've probably heard a lot of what we just covered before, but I do just want to thank you for being here to kind of relearn or rehash or refresh yourself on some of these points. We've had a few things, I think a few snafus of participants who've worked with folks in the directory. And I think there was just some confusion around whether cultivars were going to help the participant get certified or not, or things like that. So we did just want to kind of make sure we brought everybody together and covered all of the information consecutively. Plus, we have our great guest speaker, Ryan. So, all right, so with that, if you have questions, feel free to type them into the chat box, or you can, I think it also would work for you to unmute yourself and just share them out loud. I personally can have a hard time kind of following the chat box when it gets too overwhelmed, but let's see, first one here I notice is a question about, oh, I'm going to stop sharing here. Hold on one second. There we go. Now we can kind of see things better. All right, so the first question is, on the 50% of plants standard, is this individual plants or species? All right. Megan, I feel like you got first stab at this. You did a great job, maybe to just kind of prevent you from having to.
Susie, I see that Stacy is saying, Megan, reconnect, please, but I don't know what that means. I'm seeing your image, so I'm just.
So just speaking up because Stacy contacted me and asked me, Stacy Stewart got bumped out somehow and she needs to get back into the program.
Okay, and I can't, I don't have host privileges. It's only Susie. So Susie has to be the one.
Yes, and I contacted Susie as well.
I'm like, I can't do that.
Yeah, it looks like she's now here. Stacy, do you want to unmute and let us know if you're here? I think I let you in already, so this might have been from a while ago. I can't do anything to help her unless she clicks on the link to try to get back in. And so if Patty, would you be able to contact her and let her know to try that link again? And when she does that, I'll be able to see her in the waiting room and I can then let her in. Thank you. We definitely want to make sure she can be here.
Yeah, sorry. Thanks, Susie.
Yeah.
In terms of Damon, in terms of your question, I sometimes think it's helpful to think about it from like a coverage perspective. Like if I were looking at it from an aerial within an area, kind of looking down, 50% of the plants within that area, right from the coverage, are Portland plant list native plants. Does that make sense, hopefully, to answer that question? If not, I'm happy to give detail, but I kind of think if I were looking down at it and it's, let's say, a rectangle, for ease, 50% of the coverage would be Portland plant list plants. And then
Yeah,
Susie, do you want me
great.
to ask you the next question?
Sure.
Yeah, so the question is nurse logs. It's very difficult to transport large logs. If a participant has a qualifying log, I think that's saying 5 feet long, but they have cut it into half to transport, would it still count? This is assuming they position the 2 pieces back to back to mimic the original qualifying nurse log. Nitpicky question, but it has come up from multiple backyard habitat participants I've worked with. So
Yes, thank you. That is a great question. I've also had that come up in site visits I've gone on. Yes, I think, to be honest, we have 10 different technicians and about 35 participants that do certification visits. We try to get everybody on the same page. There might be some, I can't guarantee that this is going to be 100% consistent, but yes, that would qualify for certification. We do have that recommendation that the log be 5 feet long or longer, but you make a great point. They're really heavy. They're hard to move around. So for instance, in my yard, I have actually about 8 or 10 different smaller ones, and they're not even actually close together, but in my mind, I can put them all together and they're probably about 20 feet long. So I think we're somewhat liberal with this in terms of not being too picky about whether they're really close to each other or spread out. I think as long as they cumulatively add up to be 5 feet long, that's awesome. People usually build on it too once they start a project like that. So that's great. Okay, Megan, I'll return the favor.
yeah.
How long between or I wonder if this might be a better one for me.
Yeah.
Okay. How long between signing up for the program and having an assessment done? Within our structure, co-management structure, one of the things I'm kind of lead on is working with the folks who are newly signed up. And Patty, Stacy just came back in, so she should be good to go now. Thank you. Yes, in terms of the time frame between someone signing up and getting their initial site visit, it does really depend on the area that they're in. We have some areas that are seeing a very large number of signups right now, and that's primarily, I would say, inner East Side Portland, but also some parts of Washington County and Clark County. So I would say an average, it could be as little as 3 weeks and as much as 3 months, probably. So I wish I could have a more specific answer, but we're seeing folks just as quickly as we can in a format that works really well. Sometimes it just means being patient. So. Okay, Megan, question for you. Some leaves are very difficult to break down, such as beech leaves or Norway maple leaves. Can these be mowed over to help them break down?
So I feel like this is a complicated question. And so I'm going to give the kind of dual thoughts, right? So in terms of a habitat perspective, right, if you're in essence mowing over leaves or breaking them down, right, that's going to have an impact on like insects, right? So if that is the priority for someone, right, like that, it's definitely a consideration. In terms of thinking about it from a soil health perspective, right, to break it down faster, right, like that's kind of a different approach. So I think I'm just going to say there's a balance, right? And there's kind of a positive and negative within that. So that's kind of my both and answer to that question. It depends. Susie, is there danger of nest boxes becoming ovens on really hot days?
That's a great question. Hold on, let me let someone in here. That's a great question. Certainly last summer when we had that heat wave, there were so many stories about birds that were fledgling birds in particular that were just roasting in their nests and jumping out, you know, which usually did not end well. I'm not, Megan, chime in if you know anything about this. I'm not aware of nest boxes being any more perilous on really hot days than nests made out of twigs or other materials. Have you heard anything about that, Megan?
I haven't, but if anyone has and wants to chime in, I don't want to misguide.
Yeah.
Clearly there was impacts to many birds this year. And I didn't hear that in correlation to nest boxes, but I don't want to make up an answer either. So that might be something that if someone has that question, I might really direct them to the Wildlife Care Center at Audubon to ensure the best possible answer.
Yeah, I think that's great. It might be one reason to consider placing the next box in a shady location. I think, you know, that birdwatch.org website and Audubon's Care Center likely has information about, I think most nest boxes can go in shady areas. So that's probably the way to go. Okay, let's see here. Next question. Do you ever allow properties over an acre to participate in backyard habitat? Why only under 1 acre? Megan, do you want this one or you want me to take it?
Yeah, no, I got it. This one. So we do if it's a community site, right? Or kind of it's going to be a demonstration site that's open to the public. The reason that we focus on 1 acre or less really is kind of capacity and the ability to offer resources, right? So oftentimes, let's say this happens a lot in Washington County, a site that is 4 acres wants to enroll in the program, what we would do is direct them to work with the local soil and water conservation district, because the support that they can provide for that larger scale is more attuned to what we could provide, right? And just thinking about the capacity even of our habitat technicians, like a 4 acre site, and making recommendations. It's a lot more involved. So we try to be really realistic about that. But with community sites where kind of the impact is going to be reaching a larger number of people, we will often focus on a subset of the site. Susie, how would a nonprofit partner with Backyard Habitat for a planting habitat project?
I think it depends on what the nonprofit does. If it's a nonprofit that is interested in signing up their office for the program, that's great. Like Megan mentioned, that would be considered a community site because many people can access it. If you're interested in partnering on something like helping participants get native plants or something like that, feel free to reach out to Megan and I, maybe email both of us, and then depending on the location or the type of project, we can determine which of us it would best go to. And so let's see, and what I'll do is make sure to include Megan's email in the email that I'm sending out in the next 2 days with the follow-up information. But we do love partnerships, so thank you for asking that question. All right, Megan, question for you. In regards to planting concentrated areas, does the individual determining this consider the plant's eventual spread over time? We often plant young plants, so wondering how established those layers need to be.
They do. That it's a great question, right? And we, it's something we always hope more people will talk to people about, right? Because you can end up with some really densely planted areas because people don't think about how large that plant gets. So it's definitely something that folks take into consideration when, you know, looking at areas and certifying properties, right? That said, like sometimes if it's like everything is just so young and so not yet established, I think sometimes there'll be conversations with the participant to say like, you know, you've really planted the equivalent of, you know, platinum, but like as it's not filling in, what, you know, would you want to like certify at a lower level, you know, and then you can kind of continue to work towards something. So you know, there's a little bit of nuance that can happen with folks, but it is definitely a consideration. I'm trying to think here. So this question for you, Susie, is, and this might just be clarifying confusion. So is it 50% of the plants, not the available space for planting in the entire yard?
Right. So let's use silver certification as an example. So say I were going out to Megan's yard. I'm meeting Megan for a site visit. And what I'll do as I prepare for the site visit is I'll look up her property in one of our local mapping systems to determine the total lot size. And then from the total lot size, I'll subtract any buildings or paved areas, and whatever is left is what we call plantable area. That's the term that we use. So you can call it yard area or you can call it plantable area. We call it plantable area because it means it doesn't have concrete, it doesn't have a building there, so they could plant there. So there's plantable area around the house, and to reach silver certification, they would just need to pick one corner that consists of 5% of that whole plantable area. And within that area where they're focusing their native plants, 50% of those plants need to be native plants from the Portland plant list. So we're talking about like, you know, in a planting bed, if you want to call it a planting bed, 50% of the plants within that planting bed are native plants from the Portland plant list. I think that hopefully clarified that, but continue to add questions if we're not, if there's still questions there.
And Susie, are we supposed to be taking a brief break? Because I know we have more Q&A.
We are, yeah, I think, and you know, Ryan might be wondering the same thing. So I think what we can do is go with these Q&As to 3:30. And then we'll take a break until 3:45, and then we'll still have 45 minutes for his 30-minute presentation and 15 minutes in questions. So let's take a few more questions till 3:30. Hopefully, Ryan, hopefully that works for you. If not, please speak up so we know. We have questions coming in hot and heavy, so I think if we can get to a few more, that would be great. Okay, Megan, can you distinguish between plant hybrids and selections? Oh, this might be, okay, let me know how you feel about this one. Selections are
I'm going to give it to you, Susie.
Okay, all right, fair enough. I wonder if you distinguish between plant hybrids and selections. Selections are genetically native plants with naturally occurring traits. So nursery folks would propagate that individual plant to reproduce the large flowers or especially colorful leaves. So would this be considered a native plant? Yes, I would consider natural, you know, naturally, I don't want to say mutated, that sounds bad, but native plants that have some alteration, but have developed that alteration on their own, I would consider those to be native. One thing I should mention though, is that because we do have so many folks out there doing site visits and certification visits, it could be that a volunteer shows up to do a certification and sees a big clump of, let's use lupin as an example. They show up and they see a big patch of lupin that is not the color that they know our native species to be. They might make an assumption that that's a cultivar because these things are just, complex. And so, what I would say is that selections, like plants that have altered their traits on their own, are native. And I would consider them native, but in this case, it's kind of a complexity where we might not be able to guarantee that everybody that's out doing certification visits is going to understand to ask a question about that, or will know exactly how to handle that, because they're volunteers. They're very knowledgeable, but they're doing the best they can. So hopefully that question is satisfying. Let's see. Okay, here's a question for you, Megan. Are there woody debris resources for participants? And where can arborists promote woody debris within your program?
Brian, I want to make certain, and hi, Brian, that I'm answering this correctly. I mean, we do have resources about creating woody debris piles, but I feel like what you're actually asking is if a participant wants woody debris. Am I understanding that correctly? I'm going to assume so.
I'm pretty sure you're right, Megan.
I wrote yes in the.
Okay, great. Thanks, Brad. I think it's a great question. I feel like we've talked about this with you in the past. I mean, if there is an identifiable place and we can list that as a resource through the website, I think that'd be something that we would be interested in doing in the future. Of course, the Friends of Backyard Habitat Facebook group is a place to do it, but if there were an identifiable place beyond the chip drop, I know this is more like thinking about nurse logs and other elements. I think we'd be happy to find a place to create a resource to make that more readily available to people. And we do that with other resources like through our e-newsletter and things. So.
Yeah, and for anyone who may not already know about Chip Drop, it's a really great local organization where arborists who have just taken down a tree or pruned a tree or something, they're matched up with someone who wants that woody debris. And so the arborist, the Chip Drop will tell the arborist where to deliver that woody debris. So it is a source of free woody debris. It's, I think, chipdrop.org, I believe, is the website, but you can probably Google search it pretty easily as well.
Okay, Susie, the next question. Would you consider an alternate gold certification for meadowscaping? There are many instances where a tree is not appropriate. Usually they're too big for city lots. Plus a tree is a big long-term maintenance and money commitment.
Yes, that is a good question. It's a little tricky. We do have to be really consistent with the way that we certify properties, because people sign up about this program often because they hear about it from a neighbor. And so if we make an exception in one yard, their neighbor is probably going to find out about it. And if we didn't make that exception for them, it can be really tricky. So we try to be as consistent with our certification criteria as possible. In situations where we have a participant and their yard is very small, or they have concerns about a big tree or something like that, what we do is just let them know, like, honestly, what you're doing, if you can get to silver or platinum, that's great. I honestly at my house don't even have platinum because I have a Norway maple that's doing a great job at managing stormwater. And so, I think really the talking point that we try to use in those situations is just whatever you can do, just just do the best you can, and whatever level you get to is great. It's, we don't see it as a competition. I think we just see it as a way to like help people do more if they can. So I don't know if that's a satisfying answer to that question, Mark, but did I at least touch on the question? Did I understand the question right there? If you want to unmute, just let me know. Okay.
Well, and Susie, can I just add one thought on this one?
Of course.
Is like if someone has a meadowscape, right, and the sun considerations, for instance, to get gold certification within the program, you don't have to have a large form tree. Although I will readily admit I am a big tree component, so maybe I'll share that bias, although it's a good bias. But like someone can have, for instance, a vine maple, right, within their yard, as just one example to get it. But also if someone has a meadowscape in one area of their yard and space for a large form tree in another area, both of those could happen in a yard. It doesn't mean that the tree has to be in the same space as the meadowscape, just as, there's kind of the nuance to that. It doesn't all have to be compounded into just one area, would just be all that I would add.
Yes, thank you, Megan. I think I missed that nuance, but that's a really good point. Okay, we're at 3:30 and we have quite a few more questions here. So I think what might be best is go ahead and starting our break. Let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break to 3:40. And then when we come back, we can have Ryan jump into his presentation, which will be 30 minutes long. And then after that, we'll be having another Q&A session. And so we can answer any questions about Ryan's presentation, and we can also, we might also have time to touch on some of these other questions that we didn't have time to get to here. So thank you, everybody. Let's take a 10-minute break and we'll see you back here at 3:41.
That would be, oh, actually, a bunch of tables, okay.
Um,
Hi, Susie. I'm just
Hi,
messing around
Ryan.
getting set up
That's
over
great.
here. Does that
Yes,
look like
thank-
how you want it to look?
That looks great. That looks great. And let's see, you're able to talk. Yeah, I did set it so that you could, I think, yep, you're presenting and I can hear you. So I think you're all set to go.
Great. Would you like me to take it down for a minute or just leave it up with my screen share right now?
You can just go ahead and leave it up. I think transitioning to this is perfect.
Great. And I spend the first few minutes talking about myself, so I don't think there's any need for much introduction unless you want to.
Okay, yeah, just feel free to share about yourself and your organization and yeah, both of your organizations and anything else you want. I can't think of any other intro. I'm happy to introduce you if you would like me to do that, or if you just want to jump in and introduce yourself, I'm great with that too, whichever you prefer.
Yeah, I'm happy to introduce myself. You just give me a thumbs up when you're ready to go, and we'll make it happen.
Okay, sounds good. Let's get started. My clock says 3:36. Let's just get started right at 3:41. So in 5 minutes, if that sounds good.
Sounds great. You just come on for a second and say something, and I'll get started.
All right, perfect. Thank you.
Thanks, Susie.
All right, welcome back, everyone. It's 3:41, so we are going to go ahead and get started with Ryan's presentation here. So Ryan, thanks so much for joining us. I'll let you jump right in.
Yeah, thanks, Susie. This has been great information so far, and people have asked really great questions, so I'm excited to be part of this. I recognize a few familiar names on the looking at the participant list, so hi everyone, but most people are unfamiliar, so I thought I'd start off by telling you a little bit about myself and my sort of qualifications with landscapes and wildlife. And so I grew up in an unusual horticulture family. This is some of my art when I was a child, if I can get my computer to work. I basically only drew trees. They were the only thing that I drew. And these trees always were homes to wildlife. So as I became an arborist, I sort of kept this mentality that trees were homes to wildlife. When I was finishing up graduate school, I started working at a horticultural consulting firm. And so I've been a consulting arborist for about 10 years now. But I started off doing a lot of tree inventories, a lot of data and mapping. My specialty became trees in construction, how to preserve trees while there's construction going on around that and how to protect them during that process. So I'm now a certified arborist, tree risk assessment qualified, registered consulting arborist, those sorts of things. And about a year ago, I was really focused on training, in particular, training arborists to be consultants. Until about 6 months ago, I split off and started my own company. So now I'm mostly working again with clients on projects, things like that. In parallel, my master's degree is in international nature conservation. I've always been sort of very ecology focused. I am a master birder through the California Academy of Sciences program. I've volunteered in a wildlife rehabilitation hospital for a little over a year. I'm one of the founding members of Tree Care for Birds. So this was a group of people in California that came together. We were arborists, wildlife biologists, public agencies, wildlife advocates, coming together around trees and birds, trying to solve some of these problems that we were having. And we'll talk a little bit more about what those were. And I lead trips, both bird trips and sort of tree bird combined trips. So if anybody wants to go out and see some birds and talk trees with me, I do that through the Columbia Slough Watershed Council and some other organizations. So we can go out and do that. I split off about 6 months ago and started my own company. So Nidus Consulting is a Portland-based arboriculture and ecology consulting company. So Nidus just is Latin for nest. It also has some obscure English definitions like a place where something is developed or fostered. Arboriculture means trees. Ecology are interactions between biological organisms and their environment. And when I say I'm a consulting company, my company doesn't own any saws. We don't do physical labor. We do a lot of data collection, report writing, and give recommendations. Most of my recommendations involve trees in construction. Like I said, I developed my specialty over time, but we also do tree risk assessments and 1,000 other things, depending on what problems our clients are having and what we can do to help. Normally at this point in the presentation, I change to talk about why wildlife are important. And maybe while we should have that conversation for your other projects, but for these projects, your wildlife are so clearly important because your clients really, really care about wildlife. Everyone who enrolls in this program cares about wildlife and wants you to be acting responsibly around the wildlife in their yard. So everything that I'm going to talk about today is equally true for the other projects, the projects that you are doing not for backyard habitat clients. But what we can be certain of is that your clients really want you to do these sorts of activities on their projects. And really, the reason why I'm talking today is because there is a new bullet point in the agreement that you're going to see here and sign in the next couple weeks. And so basically, we have a list of things that the practitioners agree to do. And at the bottom of that list, the very last one is minimize impacts to nesting birds and other wildlife during vegetation removal and other activities. And so Susie didn't want to make this a requirement without giving you all the skills and some tools and some knowledge to be able to try to address this, right? So there are certainly birds nesting in some of these backyards that we're working on. And if we are out there working, we have the potential to impact them. So what can we do to be responsible about that? And there are a couple of big tools for us out there. In particular, the city of Portland has a best management practice. And my group that I mentioned earlier, Tree Care for Birds, have a best management practice. So those look like these. So we have City of Portland on the left, Tree Care for Birds on the right. And neither of these documents are perfect for your situation, both because we have such diverse people here who offer different services for different types of properties on different projects, and because nobody's written something exactly for this situation. So the City of Portland document is really designed for the geographic area of just Portland, rather than this sort of greater 4-county area that we all work in. For sort of city staff and contractors working on big projects where they're removing at least 5,000 square feet of generally vegetation removal, generally invasive vegetation removal. And it relies heavily on scheduling work and using wildlife biologists. Those things are important in the Tree Care for Birds practices, but we have some other tools that make it more complicated to follow, but also give us a little more flexibility and give us a little bit more in terms of tools to be able to try to minimize our impacts to nesting wildlife. So what we'll do is we'll take a look at the Tree Care for Birds best management practices, where it has this sort of main best management practice, where we intentionally wrote this to be incredibly broad, so that this applies to all of the United States or maybe North America, maybe broader than that. And then there are appendices for 4 different states in this document. Now we're going to ignore all of those for now and say that since there's no appendix for the Portland area or the Oregon area, what can we take out of the City of Portland document, combine it in with our best management practices to try to give you all some tools to help you minimize impacts to these nesting wildlife. I'll point out that the City of Portland document is not the only one in town. City of Gresham has a document that's similar, a little bit different, has a relatively similar approach. I'm sure there's others out there, so just beware that these are not the only ways to approach this. You should figure out the way that best works for you to approach this situation. So what I'd recommend doing is going to the Tree Care for Birds website, click on Resources, BMPs, and download the latest document. We've had several different versions of this, so you might check that it says with Western Chapter ISA Appendices, October 2021. That's how you are sure that you have the right version, the newest version. The first thing that both of these documents are going to do is they're going to tell you a little bit about the laws. So in the United States, we have 3 main federal laws that we want to make sure we're navigating. The Eagle Act protects bald eagles and golden eagles. The Endangered Species Act protects threatened and endangered species. And the Migratory Bird Treaty Act protects about 1,000 species native to the United States. So we certainly can see eagles and may have some projects pertaining to eagles. There's only 2 of them. They have pretty strong restrictions. I don't think this is all that common. We certainly could impact some endangered species, but I don't think we find those all that often in people's backyards. What we find all the time in people's backyards are migratory birds. And so the Migratory Bird Treaty Act would be the main one that I would be concerned about. And you can read it, it's not very long. Basically, it protects native birds and their active nests. So nests that have eggs or young in them that are dependent on the nest. And so this is a pretty big deal and something that I think that we should focus on. But the laws aren't the only reason to focus on this. Like I said, every one of these program participants cares about wildlife, whether or not you're breaking the law, less important than showing that you're acting responsible in some cases. I know not everyone's arborist, and I'm going to probably say arborist too many times when I mean landscaper or landscape professional. But in the tree care industry, we have several documents like the ANSI A300 standards and the best management practices, all of which mention wildlife, mention the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, say to do pre-work inspections. And where the Tree Care for Birds BMPs step in from there is they give some advice about how to do those pre-work inspections. And that's what we're going to dive into right now. How do we go through these best management practices? What do they recommend? what can you all start using in your practices if you haven't been doing something like this? The first thing we recommend in our best management practices is to have contact information for a wildlife biologist and a wildlife rehabilitation center in case you run into problems. You don't want to be scrambling to find this. So I've talked to John at Pacific Habitat Services. They offer nesting bird surveys. They give recommendations for finding active nests on projects and being able to navigate the laws and be able to figure out how to work responsibly around them. They are willing for any of you to contact them should you find yourself in a situation where you need a wildlife biologist. I'm sure there are many other wildlife biologists here, and I'm just giving you contact information for one of them. Similarly, I think there are likely multiple wildlife rehabilitation center options depending on where you are, but the biggest and most central, most used is certainly the, as Megan mentioned earlier, the Portland Audubon's Wildlife Care Center. And so here's the phone number for them. And what I'd really like to point out is that there's nowhere on this flow chart, they have a little flow chart here about what to do if you find a baby bird. Nowhere does it say, you know, scoop it up and bring it into us. It says call the center. And so call them, check in with them beforehand, get some real advice about your specific situation. And that this is really for emergencies. It's not for, hey, there's a nest in a tree that I need to work on. I'm going to scoop it up and bring it down there. What we're generally going to do in that situation is we're going to wait until the young leave the nest and do that work at that time. So looking at the City of Portland document, as Megan showed earlier, the sort of two tools are you avoid time periods, right? We work in the non-breeding season, and we have a wildlife biologist conduct a pre-work inspection. And so I think that that's a little bit restrictive and difficult for all the different situations that we're going to find ourselves in. And so what we do in the wildlife best management practices is we recommend people get training in how to do their own pre-work inspections and really are out there looking for wildlife and trying to act responsibly around the nest that they find. And so what we do is we combine the breeding season with habitat value. So we're going to go ahead and say City of Portland has a good breeding season sort of list here. We can use sort of February 1st to July 31st as our breeding season. And this applies to a large geographic area. It's certainly not just the City of Portland. And then these are some graphics that we have in the best management practices for low, high, and sensitive habitat values. So low is in the upper right, high is in the lower right, sensitive in the lower left. And we combine these two together, the habitat value and the breeding season, to figure out like what are our chances of finding nesting wildlife? So we sort of always could find nesting birds, but in high habitat values during the breeding season, we think that we're more likely to find nesting birds there, nesting wildlife there. And so what we've developed here is sort of these categories, or you see green, orange, and red, aligning to what level of training do we think is appropriate to be working in those situations. Awareness training is what we're doing today. So everyone today, go ahead and work in low habitat values during the non-breeding season. Great. Now, if you want to work in low habitat values during the breeding season or high habitat value areas during the non-breeding season, think about getting some more training. This is what we call a wildlife trained arborist. And then category 3 is when we'd really want to call that wildlife biologist. If we're working in critical habitat, we're working in riparian areas, we probably want to have a wildlife biologist involved. Everything in the best management practices is just a recommendation for you all to figure out what makes most sense for you. Wildlife trained arborist, we could use wildlife trained landscaper here, right? Like not everyone here is focused on trees like I am. We just made up this definition. We just made up this term and we started using it and we started saying what this sort of person should be able to do. And it's mostly about conducting pre-work inspections and determining whether nests are active or not. And I think with a little practice, you all could do some of this, and I'd like to encourage you to give that a try and let me know how it goes. In terms of getting more training, the Pacific Northwest International Society of Arboriculture, Brian French and I have been running workshops. These are one-day workshops focused on these sorts of topics, on wildlife and trees. And so We have one being planned for the spring in Portland that we hope to put on and invite you all to join us there, where I think that this one-day format will dig into and get you up to the level that I think you need to be for a wildlife trained arborist. And also do all sorts of other cool things, in particular, a lot of Brian's great snag work. He does training with this. We don't know exactly what the curriculum will be this spring, but I'm sure we'll do quite a bit of both of these things. Okay, so let's go back to these categories and talk a little bit more about this and why I think rather than the sort of simple Portland breeding season, not breeding season, our approach of bringing habitat value in can sort of help. And so I consider myself a wildlife trained arborist in most cases. Maybe I can function a little bit as a wildlife biologist. That's not really, I don't really have years and years of experience with this. But if I was going into someone's backyard associated with this program, we've got my backyard in the upper right. We've got one of my friends here in the Portland area in the lower right, and we've got a riparian area, not in someone's yard, but I think theoretically you could be working in this area. So if you came into my backyard and you said, hey, this looks like it's low habitat value area, we could work sort of any time in here, but I want to schedule this work for the breeding season because I think there's a pretty low chance that we're going to find nesting wildlife here. So let's schedule it during that time when a wildlife trained arborist could be working in there, do a quick pre-work inspection and go ahead and complete our work. Whereas when we walk into someone else's yard, such as my friend here in the lower right, we say, hey, this looks like it might be high habitat value, certainly higher. So maybe I'm going to schedule this one for the non-breeding season and still be in category 2, still be comfortable with that. And so the reason why I would schedule my backyard in the breeding season is to free up space to schedule this one in the non-breeding season. And then if we found someone's yard that really has this great riparian corridor through it, we really think that this is sensitive habitat, we're going to be scheduling this in the non-breeding season and then asking a wildlife biologist to join us. I anticipate, the landowner paying for the wildlife biologist. That doesn't come out of your pocket. But if somebody gets in trouble for injuring nesting wildlife, that's likely us. That's likely the people that are out there actually doing the work. So once we've figured out that we have the right level of training to go out there, the next step is to do a pre-work inspection. So we're going out and we're looking for nests. We're looking for signs of nesting wildlife, which might be, different wildlife around. We're listening for sounds. In particular, we're looking for wildlife carrying nesting materials or carrying food back and forth to one place. We're looking for excrement on the ground, all sorts of different things like that. But we're mostly trying to identify active nests. And so we all have this picture of a nest in our head often that is a robin's nest, but those are not the only nests that we're going to see out there. We're going to see these platform nests from these hawks, big and high up in trees. Wildlife use these natural cavities that they didn't make anything at all. They're just using them. Woodpeckers are going to excavate cavities. Different species are going to make pendulous nests hanging down from vegetation like these orioles here or a bush tit. Hummingbird nests are very, very small. And this black phoebe has made this mud and twig nest on the side of a building. We could have a scrape nest just on the ground, or this even colony of nests in a single tree. So we want to be looking for all of these things while we're doing our pre-work inspections and then while we're working as well. And we'll talk about what to do if we find any in a minute here. And so these nests can be way up high in trees. They can be way down on the ground. They can be in tunnels under the ground. They can be in all sorts of different places. So we don't want to just zone in on the place we're working. We are not looking just for robin's nests in trees. We're looking all over the place for different types of nests and different signs of nesting wildlife. So I like this, right? If I think about this a lot, I look for nests all the time. And the way that I often find nests is not by looking and seeing a nest. It's by looking and seeing all this whitewash on this railing and then looking up above and saying, oh, I see where that nest is right there. I see a house finch collecting nesting material here and I follow it back to its nest and find it there. I'm listening, so I'm hearing. Let's see if I can get this to work. Maybe. I think I know what the problem is. All right, hopefully people are hearing that. Maybe, maybe not. Anyways, I'm listening for what's going on out there. And if I can hear this alarm call, this harsh, repetitive call over and over again, I'm thinking, hey, maybe there's a nest near here that this bird is trying to protect. And then I occasionally find a nest. So I noticed this Anna's hummingbird actually with nesting material flying past my office window, and tracked it down, figured out where it was building the nest, and got to watch it. So this is a really good time to find nests while they're building, because they're often collecting nesting material and coming back and forth to the nest repeatedly. That gives you a lot of opportunity to find the nest. Once they lay their eggs and they start incubating, it's much harder to find because they're so stationary. They just stay there in their nest at that time. And so think about how hard it would be to approach this area and find this little tiny hummingbird nest right in here. What you might find is you get close enough and it flies away quickly. And then you're thinking, oh, let me check out where it was flying from. Another good time to find nests is you might hear the nestlings at this stage, or you might find mom flying back and forth. So this is this female Anna's hummingbird is visiting this nest every 15 minutes because the young have to eat that often. She's probably visiting even more often most of the time throughout that day. I think this is a fun video to watch. They're pretty cute. This was in a glossy privet, about 12 feet off the ground in a very urban area right next to my office. I was actually inside the office filming this through the window glass, so I wasn't sort of too close to this nest that I might be impacting it. I was inside my office. We have a variety of pre-work inspection forms to help you with this pre-work inspection. The one on the upper right is maybe the one to start experimenting with. I'm going to send out a handout that has links to a lot of these things. But this one, Brian French and I designed together. Thanks, Brian, for helping me with that. So we're really focused on nesting wildlife when we talk about the Migratory Bird Treaty Act and the best management practices. And that's because wildlife are really good at avoiding us most of the time, right? They just fly away, they just run away. But when they are eggs or young in a nest, they're both so fragile and so stationary. This is the only time in their life that we could really, injure them very easily, try to catch a bird that's just out there flying around, an adult one. And so obviously my colleague took this picture of this hummingbird nest without the parents there. He had likely inadvertently scared them away, took a quick picture, walked away. Hopefully the parents came back. What we really want from our work is to keep the parents around so that they can protect the nest, they can keep them warm, they can keep them cool, they can do all the different things that they're doing. And so we're not just worried about removing a tree, where we're physically damaging the nest, removing a shrub where we're physically damaging the nest. We are worried about keeping mom and dad around so they can care for it. We're also worried about scaring the young out before it's time. So this raven, I didn't scare out of the nest. It was just on the ground as I was doing a tree inventory one day. And mom was sitting there watching over it. I didn't scoop it up and bring it to a wildlife rehabilitation center or anything. It seemed healthy enough. It seemed like mom was right there taking care of it. So that's probably okay, but it would be much better if this young had stayed in the nest until it was ready to start flying. So once we've determined that we have an active nest, right? We did our pre-work inspection. We're like, oh, I found a nest. The next thing is to line up what our work is planned for that area. So if we find this nest in this tree, and we are removing either the branch that nest is in or the tree, there's sort of no question what's going to happen. We are definitely impacting that nest. Clearly, we are going to wait a couple of weeks and step away and let them fly away, and then we can go ahead and do this work at that time. If we are removing distant trees way out far away, we're pretty unlikely to be impacting this nest, right? That we wouldn't even know this nest was here because we wouldn't have gone all the way over here to look for it when we're removing these trees. But what's particularly difficult is this in-between zone, right? So we're removing a branch in that tree or a shrub underneath the nest or a snag nearby. Hopefully we can just leave that snag there. There's no reason to remove that snag. But these are the situations where we're not sure what's going to happen, where so much biology and different things come into it. So in these situations, what we're really recommending is that we wait for the young to leave, that we don't want to work in the area of an active nest. And that if we do need to work in this area, if there's an emergency, if there's a quick timeline, if something is happening, this is where a wildlife biologist can really help us and can come onto the site and monitor the nest or give us good advice about how to do it in a way that's not going to cause the parents to leave and not be able to care for the young or something like that. The main tool that we have to be able to figure out what that distance is where we need to involve a wildlife biologist is what's called no activity buffers. And so we have a list in our best management practices and some diagrams here so you can sort of visualize, right, of like, we're not going to work within 25 feet of this nest. We're not going to work in this area. And so we can ignore the general buffers in the best management practice in the tree care for birds one and focus on what's recommended for City of Portland, because this is much more specific to our area. And they have a variety of recommendations in here, but for raptors, they're generally recommending 330 feet. And for songbirds, they're generally recommending 30 feet. 30 feet for all songbirds seems a little small for me. I would stay further away from them than that. And I'm going to talk to the people at Portland a little bit about that, try to understand more about that recommendation. I know there's a new version of this Portland document coming out soon as well, so I'm interested to see what's in there. The City of Portland document has all sorts of other great gems in there, such as nesting birds by habitat in Portland. So for all the nesting birds that we have here, what sorts of habitats do they nest in? What birds really nest in trees in the Portland area? This will be super applicable to areas outside of Portland. This is not Portland specific by any means. And this is good information for, like, you may spot a migratory bird on your site that's leaving in a couple of weeks and really there's no chance that it's nesting in that area. Now, what that really puts pressure on you is to know what species it is, right? Because this is very specific. How many of you know what an olive-sided flycatcher looks like? And so this would take a little bit of practice, but you could get better at bird identification to be able to use some of these resources if you wanted to. And so Portland Audubon has obviously great classes and resources and all sorts of different ways to learn this. You're also welcome to come out with me. So my next walk is in the Columbia Children's Arboretum, one of my favorite places, got to be the most diverse Portland park, you know, for tree species per acre or whatever. On the 19th at 9 a.m., come out and join me. Go to the Columbia Slough Watershed Council's website if you're interested. The last thing I'll point out is, as I said before, the Portland document is really focused on invasive species removal. That's sort of how it originated. And I suspect how many of you will sort of interact with these documents and think about your potential to impact nesting wildlife. So check these out in terms of like really specific situations with really specific advice, such as, I imagine there's a lot of blackberry removal going on. And this document really points out how beneficial blackberry is and how much nesting habitat there is in there. And I fully support Himalayan blackberry removal, but I would really be hesitant to remove any blackberry from April 15th to July 31st. And what this document goes on to say is, you know, hey, you know, Anna's hummingbirds really don't nest much in Himalayan blackberry in the Portland area. So, and they're one of our main early nesters. So probably working in February and March is okay. So it's got a lot of like really great detailed information for stuff like that. Also, another recommendation for blackberry is if you're going to remove it, go ahead and, you know, brush a branch or a stick or something over the top of it. See if anything flushes out before you remove it. Try to get, you know, there's things that we can do, little tricks that we can make to try to reduce our impact to nesting birds when we're out there removing vegetation, doing other work on these projects. And so I really recommend both to check out both of these documents and find what works for you, what works for your situation. Reach out to me if you want to talk more about it, if you're having trouble with it, if you want to figure out how to schedule some more training. Maybe we can put enough pressure on Susie and Megan to say, hey, we need to have a full day workshop about everyone getting the training they need to do pre-work inspections or something like that. So I'm going to sign off with that, Susie, with just that amazingly brainstormed idea for you right there.
You're setting us up for success, Ryan, and further cultivating skills for working in habitats without causing conflict. So thank you. That was a really phenomenal presentation. Ryan, thank you so much for joining us and taking the time to put that together. I know you had to alter some of your slides because you had a bunch that were related to California and you're updating them for our area. So thank you so much. That was incredible. We're very fortunate to have such knowledgeable and passionate folks in this area that we can all draw on each other's knowledge like that. So yeah, let's see if folks have questions here. We definitely have some kudos coming in for Ryan. Does anyone have any questions for Ryan? Maybe one that I'll get started with while we wait for people's fingers to warm up and type in their questions. I was curious, you mentioned that you had that drawing where you had the branch that you definitely wouldn't want to cut because there's a nest on there. And then you had other things circled that were like kind of further away from where you were going to be working and even back on the palm tree. And you mentioned that once a bird flies away, it seems generally safe to go ahead and work in that area and take that branch off. Are there some birds that are there any birds that return to the nest over a period of time? And if so, is that something to consider? Was a question that I had.
Yeah, absolutely. So several species will have multiple clutches, and that's certainly a concern. So a little bit of it depends on what exactly your timeline is and how tight it is and things like that. So often you hear these recommendations of like, oh, we'll just wait until the end of the breeding season. And that's probably good advice, but also can be really hard to follow in certain situations. So you could go and keep an eye on this nest, check it out every once in a while. And once the young have left, go ahead, that nest is no longer protected if it doesn't have any eggs or young reliant on it. You may choose to leave it for longer than that, right? That's fine. There's no harm in that. But if you really needed to get this project done, let's say it's an emergency, right? Let's say that we're talking about a dangerous tree that is potentially going to cause a lot of damage. I would treat those situations differently. I would say, okay, this nest no longer has any legal protection. We let those young leave. I'm going to remove this tree because there's no eggs in it now, and maybe there would have been a second clutch if I hadn't have done that, but it depends on the situation that I'm in. Yeah. And then I'll just say that raptor nests are reused sort of year after year. So they're really great nests to leave, totally intact for the next season. Almost all songbirds, there are very few other, sort of smaller nests that are used season after season.
Yeah. So maybe if there's a raptor nest, it's a great time to consider turning the tree into a snag versus removing it if that was what was originally being considered.
We should consider turning every tree into a snag and then not do it all that often for a lot of logistical reasons, but we should be thinking about it all the time. Absolutely.
Yeah, great. Okay, well, we did have a question come in. We've got Linda here she has a goat business. She's new to our directory, and so she's got a group of goats that she hires out to remove blackberry and probably other things as well. And so her question is, her busy season is March through October. So she's getting people to not spray, which is great. But she is working in blackberry during the nesting season. So have you, in California, when you were working there, did you have goat groups that were doing this work? And if so, do you know any tips for that specifically?
This would be my first goat-related question that I've ever gotten. But I've back in my previous career when I was working at a land trust, we did a lot of goat grazing, so I like that idea. yeah, I don't see how it would be any different, regardless of what type of vegetation removal, what type of planting you're doing, what type of design work you're doing. You know, it all comes down to that these nests are protected, they are important. And if we're working in the breeding season, we should be doing pre-work inspections. And if we're not capable or not confident in our abilities, there's wildlife biologists and other people out there to do them. And that's hard. Like it puts a lot of constraints on us. As I said before, both of these documents only say should, only give recommendations. None of them say shall. But while there isn't a lot of enforcement of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, it's a law out there saying that we're not going to impact nesting wildlife, and it's you know, hard to imagine navigating that without doing some sort of inspection.
Well, so maybe a follow-up question to that is, for folks who aren't arborists, can they attend any of those Pacific Northwest ISA arborist focused trainings? Or do you know of other trainings that they could attend that aren't specific to arborists?
Yeah, everybody's welcome. Brian and I always have, you know, wildlife biologists join us. We always have government officials join us. We always have like landscape designers and different people in that group. It's always a really fun, interesting group of people that are not just arborists.
That's awesome. And so can they find information about that training on your website as well as on the ISA website?
That's a good question. I don't quite know what's going to happen. We don't
Okay.
have a set date right now. Otherwise, I would share a good resource for that. But yeah, it'll be. We'll talk about how to make that available.
Yeah, maybe it's something that we can help spread the word about once those details are finalized.
That'd be great.
Okay. All right. Next, are you ready for the next question?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have a favorite Pacific Northwest tree identification book or bird ID book?
Sure. Yeah, I'm partial to the Sibley Guide for Birds for my personal birding use. My wife likes Birds of North America better. There's a whole bunch of different guides out there. I recently started using a Spanish one because we led a couple Spanish tours. So I've got all sorts of different books. But Sibley Guide to Birds of the West is where I would start for people in the Portland area. And then I am relatively new to the Pacific Northwest. I've been here a year and a half. So I'm taking a tree ID course. I just had it earlier today, actually, which is great. If anybody wants to get real serious about their tree ID, both Portland Community College and Clackamas offer tree ID. And then I use so many different resources for my tree ID. It depends on whether I'm out in the forest or in riparian areas or on the street or. But yeah, if it's a street tree, if it's in urban areas, there's no one book. You gotta have 6 in order to figure out what it is. So if you're just getting started, if you don't have that base knowledge yet.
Yeah, well, and we're lucky we've got some resources here. I know at Portland Audubon's Nature Store, they have a bunch of books, tree related, bird related, same for Backyard Bird Shop, and most of our local nurseries, plant nurseries, also have a book selection. So yeah, a plethora of great books out there.
And then I see Stacy mentioning apps. So I use eBird almost every day. I use Sibley on my phone a lot. And then Merlin is amazing recently. I haven't played around with it too much, but it, they call it the Shazam for birds, right? Of the ability to identify bird calls through your phone app and then sort of, and play bird calls like into your ear to be like, oh yeah, that is what I'm hearing, is amazing. Like books cannot replicate that. And then I use All About Birds a lot for learning more about birds while I'm at home on the computer.
Is that an app or is that a website?
It's a website.
Okay. All About Birds.
And I can't help but not plug the classes at Audubon. I feel like I wouldn't be a good employee if I didn't. It's just, I've always found, I remember when I was learning plant ID initially, right? Having someone to help tell you, yes, no, this is what it is, this is what it's to look for is incredibly helpful. And Audubon has all sorts of class, both virtual and in person, that are relatively affordable. So I would just highly recommend that if that's something you're interested in. So someone can really help you, guide you for what to look for.
Structure in a class like that's so helpful. I
Yeah.
think in particular for learning bird calls, bird songs, like not having taken a class and having that structure would be really, really hard to learn it.
Yeah, I think birdathon is a fun way to do that too. I definitely learned the most about birds going on the birdathon trips. You can sign up for those and go with folks and learn from each other. That's a great one too.
I did
Right.
the Christmas bird count by myself last time. So if anyone wants to come trudge around with me for Christmas bird count, I'll probably be by myself again. So love to have someone else.
Awesome. Ryan, will your PowerPoint be available for us to refer to later?
Sure.
I'm happy to share it out. So if you're comfortable sharing it, I'm happy to share it out.
Sure, I'll package up a PDF of that and everyone can have it.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. And this is being recorded like the previous portion too. So you'll get a link to this presentation, this full presentation as well. All right. Melissa asks, Linda, can you share your goat business name and info? It will be listed in our directory, but Linda, if you want to go ahead and include that in the chat box here so that folks have that available, I think that's a huge interest. So I'm so glad that you're here doing this, and yeah, let's send some business your way. All right, more kudos. Okay, I see you actually did that, a few down, so great, thank you. More.
Susie, can I also, there was a question earlier from the earlier session that I thought Ryan might be able to help answer, so we didn't miss that one.
Sure.
Which was, the question was, what do you think about those nest opening extenders that go out about 2 inches? Do they stop squirrel arms from reaching in? I thought you might be better than either Susie or I at answering that.
I saw that question. I don't really have an opinion, except that my chickadee boxes that I made seem to be just fine and not need those extenders. I have lots of squirrels in my neighborhood and my young fledged, so that's all I really have to say about it.
Awesome. Ryan, I think we might have covered all the questions that came in for you. If I missed anything that came in for Ryan, please go ahead and unmute and speak up so we don't miss a question for him.
Sorry, you might have answered this. I was just wondering if the PowerPoint is going to be available and where I can find that, if possible.
Yes, it sounds like Ryan will be providing a PDF version of the presentation, and then we're recording this entire 2.5 hour session that includes Ryan's presentation, that we'll be posting it on YouTube. And so I'll be sending out a link to the entirety so that you can watch the whole thing again if you want to. So his presentation will be, of course, at this end portion of it. So I think that answers the question. I can't think of any other way to share it. So I think that answers. All right, well, let's see. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you again for being here. It's great to welcome you to Oregon in this way. I love how you landed here and just like jumped in right away, continuing your work. We definitely need all the help we can get here. So I'm glad that you landed here.
Thanks for having me. This program is great, and you hear about this program, all over the U.S., all over the world. So well done setting this up, and you all for participating in it.
It's true. We get folks that write us from Japan and all over the place. So it's pretty neat that we're inspiring folks even outside of our region. So at this point, I think, thank you everybody for being here. We have a few more minutes. I'm happy to circle back and answer a few questions that we didn't get to after we wrapped up Megan and I's portion, but I'll just take a minute to say for anybody who needs to go ahead and hop off the meeting, thank you for being here. We really appreciate all that everyone here is doing out in the field to protect wildlife and to work with our participants and to just really help us have a greener, healthier, more vibrant region. And again, I'll be following up with an email in the next couple of days with the next steps information. All right, so to circle back to some of our earlier questions, we might only have time for a couple here, but one that I wrote down, Megan, if you wouldn't mind going back and seeing if you can find other questions that we missed. One that I did write down was someone asked about crownbees.org, the website that I recommended for looking for information for pollinators and nesting materials, etc. The question was, is that a good resource for paper tubes for mason bee houses? And yes, it is. It's a great resource for that. They carry all sorts of materials for mason bees and other pollinators. They also have lots of videos. They have how-to videos on how to clean the mason bee cocoons, all sorts of great videos. So definitely check it out, lots of information. There are actually quite a few places in our region where you can find paper tubes and other mason bee materials that you can purchase. I've been surprised to see how many of our local nurseries carry them. You know, just looking at our native plant discount flyer that lists out 12 different nurseries, you know, we've got, I think Cornell Farm, Garden Fever, Portland Nursery, Birds and Bees Nursery, and Livingscape. All of those I've visited and I've seen mason bee tubes and liners at. So I think those are great, as well as Backyard Bird Shop has lots of these materials. I think the nature store at Audubon probably does as well. So lots of places you can go. I think Crown Bees also sells cocoons. So if you need,
I can confirm it does. Yeah.
Yep.
For both
Yeah.
mason and leaf cutter.
Crown Bees does. Right. And I think it's seasonal. It's very seasonal, and some years they have more than others. So, you know, generally they do sell them, but at the time you go there, they may not have some. But Megan, any other questions that you found that we should cover?
There was a question. We have had clients that want to remove all leaves from allelopathic plants, especially large trees. So what would you suggest?
Wow, we could take this in a few different directions. Do you want to take a shot at that one, Megan? Or I'm also wondering if we have an arborist or someone on this or someone else here that has information on that front. I think, you know, in terms of allelopathic, that term means that the plant puts out chemicals that prevent other types of plants from growing there. So like walnuts are kind of notorious for this, walnut trees. And so the question basically, I think probably stems from, you know, you've got this material where if you put it on the ground, you may not have other plants that are able to grow there. So what's the best thing to do with them? And, you know, I don't have a real great answer for this. I would share my personal opinion is that it's kind of a personal choice. Like, I think it would make good mulch, but it certainly could impact what's able to be grown there. I have a similar issue with a maple tree in my yard that has really thick leaves. And I just picked a corner of my yard, and that's where I always put those leaves. And I just let it be that corner with all the leaves. And I see so many birds going over there and picking through it because they want to find those insects on the underside of the leaves. And so that's what I do with it. But I would love if anybody else has thoughts to share on that. I think we wore everybody out, Megan.
Yeah.
This is probably, oh,
yeah,
go
I
ahead.
wouldn't have a particularly different answer, right? And to that, and there is plant specific recommendations that sometimes happen associated with that could be looked into. But I think I only found one other question, Susie, and you actually might be good to answer this, which is, I have contacted ODOT to request native oaks be planted along Highway 217, right? That's in Washington County. The answer has twice been that it'd be too difficult to change maintenance strategies. I'll just shake my head. Would anyone be willing to team up with me on this or direct me to someone who has more leverage? And there has been some recommendations, but I didn't know if you have thoughts, Susie, related to like the Oak Prairie Working Group and some others that are specifically working on oak habitat.
Yeah, that's exactly who I thought of, Megan, was the Oak Prairie Working Group. This is a somewhat new group. The couple folks that I know that are really part of that group, there's Lori Hennings. Her name is spelled LORIHENNINGS. She's at Metro, and she's one of the primary contacts for that group. Since we're talking about Clackamas County, I would also recommend reaching out to Nicole R. Her name is spelled NICOLE, and her last name is AHR. Oh, Washington County. Sorry, I misunderstood. Well, in Clackamas County, I wonder if she actually may still be a good contact even in Washington County, because she works very closely throughout the 4-county area. So I would actually still recommend reaching out to her. She is with the Clackamas Soil Water Conservation District. And her name again is Nicole, NICOLERAHR. And here, why don't I just go ahead and chat that in here. Nicole R at District. I would also say Brita. I'm spacing Megan on Brita's last name, Pajunas.
Pajunas, PAJUNAS, Pajunas.
Okay, she is at the Tualatin Soil Water Conservation District. I think those 3 folks, and then I'd mentioned Lori Hennings at Metro would be really good contacts, I think, for that question.
Yeah, and the only other person I could think might be Ted Labby at Urban Green Institutes. Ted was really involved in kind of the oakscaping handbook manual, really knowledgeable about it, and definitely is an advocate by all means. So,
yep, absolutely. Great.
Hi, I have a colleague who met with ODOT a while ago, another arborist who was talking about similar things with mostly with the interstate land. And he has met basically the same resistance that like they can't add labor hours basically to all the mowing. And one of their excuses was that it would take more fuel to mow as they, make turns around trees. But I have read a couple things, and I can't remember where, talking about how I know someone mentioned some of the habitat creation along highways in the Midwest and stuff that, especially around freeways and whatnot, putting habitat right by freeways actually draws that wildlife to a freeway. Like there's been some milkweed plantings in monarch corridors, and then they find a bunch of dead monarchs from being hit by cars and stuff. So there's a little bit of grain of salt there. I have had a lot more luck just working with cities and counties and Metro and stuff, and on their like pieces of land, they're a little more out of harm's way, a little less ODOT regulated.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. That's great to have someone who's had that experience and knows folks who are doing that. Yeah, I've read similar things about monarchs, and I think ODOT actually is. I think they do have portions of the highway that they've dedicated to pollinator plants. And I've heard that concern as well. So it's maybe hard to know what's best, but it seems like they're doing something.
Yeah, and I think I don't know who owns the land, which is always a question, but they have done some Oregon white oak planting along Highway 14 in Vancouver that may be on WashDOT land. If reaching out to the folks at Vancouver Urban Forestry, I know they would know who had done that and they might have some tips about what has worked or not. I've seen various plantings specifically within that. So that might be just a resource for how they were successful. I can't say how WashDOT interacts with it versus ODOT by any means. Different agencies, different states, but might be helpful.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you, Megan. Okay, well, we are past time and I'm sure everybody has other things. We've kept you on here for so long. You all have been great. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll follow up with some emails, and take care. Thank you for all you're doing, and we'll see you next year, if not earlier. So take care, everybody.
Thanks, Susie.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jane. Bye.
Good to see you, Megan. Hope you're
It's
well.
good to see you, Jane.
Talk to you soon.
Bye.